I never thought I'd be the guy sitting in a dark driveway, heart hammering against my ribs, like a trapped bird staring at my own front door as if it belonged to a stranger. You see these stories online. You hear about the guy whose life gets flipped upside down in a single afternoon. You think you're different. You think your marriage is built on something solid, like the heavy timber frames of the houses I spend my days building. But sometimes, the foundation is rotting long before the roof starts to leak. My name is Rhodes. I'm a guy who values silence. In my line of work, you learn that the best structures aren't the ones that shout. They're the ones that stand quiet and firm against the wind. I thought my wife, Delilah, understood that. We've been married for 12 years. 12 years of coffee in the morning, soccer games on the weekends, and the kind of comfortable rhythm you think lasts forever. But looking back, I realize I was living in a house of cards, and the wind had been picking up for a long time. Before I get into the wreckage, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt that cold, sinking sensation in your gut when you realize the person you'd take a bullet for is the one pulling the trigger? If you've been through this, if you've felt that specific kind of betrayal that leaves you breathless, drop a comment. Let me know where you're watching from. It helps to know I'm not the only one who has had to rebuild from the ashes. And if you find strength in these stories, hit that subscribe button. It's the only way we keep the truth alive. Everything started to crack about 6 months ago. We live in a quiet, rugged corner of the Pacific Northwest, where the trees are tall and the fog rolls in thick from the coast. It's a beautiful place to raise a kid. Our son Griffin is 10. He's the kind of kid who notices everything, the way the moss grows on the north side of the cedar trees, the way the tide pulls back at the beach. He's sensitive. He has my eyes, but he has Delilah's quick, sharp mind. I used to be proud of that. Now it's the very thing she's using against me. Delilah was always the perfect mom in our town. She ran the bake sales, she volunteered for every school event, and she had this way of making everyone feel like they were her best friend. I was the quiet husband in the background, the one who worked 60 hours a week to make sure they had the best of everything. I didn't mind. I loved providing for them. I thought that was my role. I didn't realize that while I was out in the rain, swinging a hammer to pay for the granite countertops, she was inviting a different kind of storm into our home. The first sign was the phone. It's always the phone, isn't it? She started taking it into the bathroom. She started sleeping with it under her pillow. When I'd walk into a room, she'd flip it over so fast, it was like she was hiding a live grenade. I'm not a jealous man. I'm not the type to go snooping through a woman's private messages because I believe trust is the only currency that matters in a marriage. But then the atmosphere in the house shifted. It became cold, brittle, like walking on thin ice in the middle of January. She started picking fights over nothing. The way I chewed my food. The fact that I didn't want to go to a high-end gala in the city with some new friends she had met. She told me I was stagnant. She told me I had no ambition. I'd look at the beautiful home I had built for her with my own 2 hands and wonder what more I could possibly give. Then came Caspian. He was one of those guys who looked like he stepped out of a luxury car commercial. Sharp suits, expensive, watch a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was a developer from the city, someone Delilah met through one of her projects. He started showing up at our house for business meetings. I tried to be the bigger man. I shook his hand. I offered him a drink. I saw the way he looked at my wife and, more importantly, the way she looked at him. Like he was a lifeline, and I was the anchor dragging her down. But the betrayal of the heart was only half the story. The real knife in the back, the one that twisted until I couldn't breathe, involved Griffin. It happened on a Tuesday. I had finished work early because the rain was too heavy for the roof we were framing. I came home quietly, hoping to surprise them with some takeout. As I walked through the mudroom, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. It was Delilah and Griffin. "I know it's hard, honey," Delilah was saying, her voice dripping with that fake, honey-sweet sympathy she used when she wanted something. "I know Dad hasn't been around much. It's because he doesn't really want to be. He's talking about moving away, maybe starting a new life somewhere else." My heart stopped. I stood frozen in the hallway, the bag of food feeling like a lead weight in my hand. "Is he going to leave us, Mom?" Griffin's voice was small, trembling. He sounded terrified. "He's just selfish, Griffin," she whispered. "He doesn't love us the way we love him. That's why he works so much. He's trying to save up enough money to run away. He told me he's tired of being a father. But don't worry, Mom is here. And Caspian. He thinks you're such a great kid. He actually wants to spend time with us." I felt a physical pain in my chest, a tearing sensation, as if someone had reached inside and grabbed my lungs. She wasn't just having an affair. She was poisoning my son's mind. She was painting me as a villain, a man who wanted to abandon his own flesh and blood, just to justify her own infidelity. She was building a cage of lies around Griffin, and she was using his fear to lock the door. I wanted to burst into that kitchen. I wanted to scream to show them the bank statements, to show Griffin the calluses on my hands from working for his future. But I stopped. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror, a man covered in sawdust and rain, looking like the very monster she was describing. If I went in there screaming, I'd just prove her right. I'd be the unstable father she wanted me to be. I turned around and walked back out into the rain. I sat in my truck for 2 hours watching the wipers sweep back and forth, trying to make sense of the wreckage. I realized then that I couldn't fight her with words. She was a master of words. She had spent years perfecting the art of the narrative. If I tried to tell Griffin the truth now, it would just be my word against hers, and she had already planted the seeds of doubt. No, I had to be the man she said I wasn't. I had to be the rock. I had to let her lies crumble under the weight of their own complexity. I decided right then that I wouldn't say a word about Caspian. I wouldn't defend myself against the lies. I would simply be there, every morning, every night. I would be the silence that she couldn't explain away. The next few weeks were a living hell. Every time I walked into a room, Griffin would look at me with this mix of fear and resentment. He stopped asking me to play catch. He stopped telling me about his day. When I tried to hug him, he'd go stiff as a board, his eyes darting toward his mother, as if seeking permission to touch me. Delilah, emboldened by my silence, started getting reckless. She'd stay out late claiming she was at committee meetings, coming home smelling of expensive perfume and wine. She started bringing Caspian around even more, introducing him to Griffin as a mentor. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to help Griffin with his math homework. He was struggling, his brow furrowed in frustration. "Here, let me show you a different way to look at that equation, Griff," I said, gently reaching for his pencil. He pulled the paper away, his eyes snapping up to mine with a sudden sharp anger. "Mom says you're only helping me because you feel guilty. She says you're going to leave anyway. So why does it matter if I learn it?" The room went deathly quiet. I could feel Delilah watching us from the doorway, a small, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She wanted me to snap. She wanted me to yell at him to tell him his mother was a liar. My hands were shaking under the table. I took a deep breath, the scent of the cedar sawdust still clinging to my shirt, and I looked my son in the eye. I didn't get angry. I didn't even look at her. "I'm not going anywhere, Griffin," I said, my voice as steady as a mountain. "I'm right here, and I'll be here tomorrow morning to make your breakfast, and I'll be here at your game on Saturday. No matter what anyone says, that's the truth." Griffin looked confused for a split second, his gaze flickering between me and his mother. The seed of doubt had been planted, but not the one she wanted. He didn't say anything, but he didn't pull the paper away again. As the days turned into a month, the tension in the house reached a breaking point. Delilah was becoming frustrated that I wasn't reacting. She wanted a fight. She wanted a divorce that she could blame on my temper or my neglect. She started talking loudly on the phone with Caspian, while I was in the next room, making sure I heard her laugh, making sure I heard her plan their future. I spent my nights in the workshop I'd built behind the house. It was the only place I felt safe. I was working on a project, a small, intricate jewelry box for Griffin's grandmother, or so I told them. In reality, it was a place for me to channel the raw, jagged pain that was threatening to consume me. Every stroke of the sandpaper, every cut of the saw, was a way of staying sane. I watched through the workshop window as a sleek black car pulled into our driveway. It wasn't mine, it was Caspian's. It was 10 p.m. on a school night. I saw Delilah walk out to meet him, wearing a dress I had bought her for our last anniversary. She didn't see me in the shadows of the workshop. She leaned in and kissed him right there in the driveway under the porch light I had installed to keep her safe at home. And then I saw something else. Up in the second-story window, the curtain moved. A small, pale face appeared behind the glass. It was Griffin. He was standing there, silent and still watching his mother in the arms of another man, while his father sat alone in the dark. I didn't move. I didn't shout. I just watched my son's silhouette against the glow of his bedroom light. He stayed there for a long time, even after the black car drove away and the house went dark. The next morning, the air in the kitchen was thick enough to choke on. Delilah was humming to herself as she flipped pancakes, acting as if she were the heroine of a romance novel. Griffin sat at the table, his head down, staring at his plate. He hadn't said a word since he woke up. "Sleep well, sweetie?" Delilah asked, reaching out to ruffle his hair. Griffin flinched. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it sent a jolt through the room. Delilah's hand froze in midair. She laughed it off, a nervous, fluttering sound. "Someone's grumpy this morning. Maybe you should spend some time with Caspian today after school. He said he'd take us to that new arcade in the city." Wouldn't that be fun? Griffin finally looked up. He didn't look at his mother. He looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed like he'd been awake all night. There was a question in them, a desperate, silent plea for me to say something, to do something to stop the world from spinning out of control. I stood up from the table and picked up my tool belt. I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. I felt him tremble under my touch, but this time, he didn't pull away. I looked at Delilah, who was watching us with a mask of perfect suburban innocence. "He's not going to the arcade," I said. My voice was low, vibrating with a strength I didn't know I had left. "Griffin and I have work to do in the shed. He's going to help me with the cedar chest." Delilah's face tightened, the mask slipping for just a second. "He has plans, Rhodes. Don't be difficult." "The plans changed," I replied, not breaking eye contact. I turned and walked toward the back door, the heavy clink of the tools on my belt, the only sound in the suffocating silence of the kitchen. I didn't look back to see if he was following. I just walked out into the cold morning air, the frost crunching under my boots, and headed straight for the workshop. I gripped the handle of the heavy oak door, my knuckles white, and pulled it open, the smell of sawdust rushing out to meet me like an old friend. I stepped inside and waited, listening for the sound of the screen door opening, my heart suspended in the quiet space between the lie and the truth. The heavy oak door groaned on its hinges, a sound that usually signaled the start of a productive day. But today, it felt like the opening of a vault where I kept my sanity. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my back to the house, staring at the workbench, where various chisels and planes lay in perfect, disciplined rows. The rhythmic drip of the morning thaw from the eaves was the only thing filling the void. Then, the soft, hesitant scuff of sneakers on the gravel broke through. The screen door had clicked shut behind me, and the small shadow that fell across the sawdust-covered floor told me Griffin had made his choice. He didn't say a word as he stepped into the workspace. He just stood by the edge of the scrap pile, his hand shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie, looking at the floor as if the grains of wood held the answers to the chaos inside our home. I didn't push him. In the world of construction, you don't force a joint that isn't ready. You sand it down, you give it space, and you let the fit happen naturally. I picked up a piece of rough-cut cedar, its scent sharp and medicinal, and handed him a block of 60 grit sandpaper. We worked in a silence that was thick and heavy, a physical weight between us. I watched his small hands move in short, frustrated bursts. Every time he looked up toward the house through the small, grime-streaked window, his jaw would tighten. I knew what he was looking for. He was looking for the ghost of that black car in the driveway, or perhaps the silhouette of his mother, who was likely still in the kitchen, weaving her next web of justification. "Why aren't you mad, Dad?" The question came out like a jagged shard of glass. He didn't look at me. He just kept scrubbing at the wood until the friction started to smoke. I stopped my own work and leaned against the bench, wiping my hands on a grease-stained rag. I looked out at the mist clinging to the pines. Anger is like a fire in a workshop, Griffin. If you don't control it, it burns the project you're trying to build. And right now, the only project that matters to me is you. He let out a shaky breath, a sound that tore through me more than any saw blade ever could. He knew. He had seen the porch light illuminating the betrayal, and he was waiting for me to explode, to confirm everything his mother had whispered in the dark. By staying calm, I was pulling the rug out from under the reality she had constructed for him. It was a slow, agonizing process of reclamation. As the days bled into weeks, the atmosphere in our house took on a surreal, haunting quality. Delilah began to realize that her psychological grip was slipping. She could sense the shift in Griffin, the way he stopped seeking her approval, the way he lingered in the workshop with me long after the sun went down. To compensate, her lies became more elaborate, more desperate. She started telling Griffin that I was sick, that my silence was a sign of a mental breakdown, and that we might have to move away for my treatment. I watched her from across the dinner table, marveling at the cold precision of her deceit. She'd smile at me, a sharp, predatory expression, while slide-talking to our son about how Caspian is looking at schools for us in the city. She was trying to build a bridge to her new life, using Griffin as the primary support beam. She didn't care that the beam was cracking under the pressure. I remember one night vividly. The rain had turned into a sleet that lashed against the siding like handfuls of gravel. I was in the living room trying to read a blueprint when Delilah came in, her phone pressed to her ear, laughing in that high-pitched, performative way she saved for Caspian. She walked right past me as if I were a piece of furniture, her voice loud and clear. "Oh, Julian, I mean Caspian. He's just sitting there. Same as always. He doesn't even hear me anymore. It's like living with a ghost. Griffin is so depressed because of it. I can't wait to get him into a healthy environment with someone who actually cares." I didn't flinch. I didn't look up. But I saw Griffin standing in the shadows of the hallway, clutching his backpack. He heard every word. The psychological toll on me was immense. There were moments when I wanted to drive to Caspian's office and tear the place down with my bare hands. There were nights when the heart-wrenching pain felt like a physical weight on my throat, making it hard to swallow. I would lie awake in the spare room, listening to the house creak, wondering if my silence was truly the right path. Was I letting my son drown in her lies just to prove a point? But then I'd think about the nature of truth. If I fought her with her own weapons, shouting accusations, bitterness, I'd just be another storm in Griffin's life. He didn't need more thunder. He needed a lighthouse. He needed to see that no matter how hard she tried to shake the foundation, I wouldn't move. Delilah's recklessness eventually began to border on the absurd. She started leaving Caspian's gifts around the house, a new designer bag, a piece of jewelry claiming they were from old friends. She was testing the limits of my endurance, trying to provoke the outburst she needed to finalize her narrative of the unstable husband. One Saturday, she went too far. She invited Caspian over, while I was out getting supplies for a new framing job. She told Griffin they were going to have a family day with their new friend. I returned home to find Caspian sitting in my chair, drinking from my favorite mug, while Delilah sat on the arm of the sofa, looking at him with an adoration she hadn't shown me in a decade. Griffin was tucked away in the corner, his knees pulled up to his chest, looking like he wanted to disappear into the drywall. "Rhodes, you're back early," Delilah said, her voice bright and brittle. "Caspian was just helping me figure out some logistics for the move we discussed." Caspian stood up, offering a hand that had never known a day of hard labor. "Hey, man. No hard feelings. Right. Sometimes things just run their course. We're just looking out for what's best for Griffin now." The audacity of it was breathtaking. Here was the man who had helped dismantle my family, standing in my living room talking about my son's welfare. I felt the heat rising in my neck, a familiar, dangerous roar in my ears. I looked at Griffin. He was watching me, his eyes wide, terrified of the violence he thought was coming. I took a breath, letting the scent of the pine and rain on my jacket ground me. I didn't take Caspian's hand. I didn't even acknowledge him. I walked past him straight to my son. "Griffin, go grab your coat. The tide is low down at the cove. I thought we could go look for those agates you like." "He's in the middle of a conversation, Rhodes," Delilah snapped, her composure finally fracturing. "You can't just ignore us." I turned slowly to face her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't call her a name. I just looked at her with a profound, quiet pity that seemed to infuriate her more than a scream ever could. "The conversation ended the moment you brought him here, Delilah," I said quietly. "Griffin the coat." Now, for the first time, Griffin didn't look at his mother for permission. He stood up, grabbed his jacket from the hook, and walked out the door ahead of me. As I followed him out, I heard Delilah behind me, her voice shrill and desperate, starting to lie to Caspian about how scary I was being. We spent the afternoon on the rocky shore, the gray Atlantic churning in front of us. We didn't talk much, but the tension that had been coiled in Griffin's shoulders for months finally began to unfurl. He started picking up stones, turning them over in his hands, finding the hidden beauty in the rough exterior. "Dad," he asked, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Yeah, Griff. Is Mom, is she telling the truth about us moving to the city?" I knelt down so I was at eye level with him. "I can't control what your mother says, Griffin, and I can't control what she does. But I can tell you this, I built that house for us. I work every day for us. And as long as there's a breath in my body, I am staying right here. You don't ever have to worry about me walking away." He looked at me for a long time, the salt spray misting his hair. Something shifted in his expression, a dawning realization, a spark of clarity. He saw the difference between the flashy promises of the man in the kitchen and the steady, quiet presence of the man on the beach. He saw the difference between the woman who used him as a shield and the man who acted as his anchor. The kitchen sink overflowed with soapy water, a small waterfall cascading onto the floor, before I realized I'd been staring at the empty driveway for nearly 10 minutes. I turned the brass handle cutting the flow and let the sudden quiet of the house settle into my bones. For months, this kitchen had been a theater of war, filled with the sharp scent of Delilah's perfume and the even sharper edge of her lies. Now it just smelled like lemon soap and the faint, lingering aroma of the pancakes she'd abandoned. I grabbed a towel and knelt to soak up the mess, my movements slow and deliberate. Across the room, Griffin sat at the small breakfast nook, his fingers tracing the grain of the unfinished cedar box. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in a single morning. "Do you think she's coming back today?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper against the hum of the refrigerator. I squeezed the wet towel into the bucket. "I don't know, Griff, but the door isn't locked against her. It's just... the weather has changed." I wasn't lying. In our town, when a storm passes, you don't immediately go out and start rebuilding. You wait. You listen to the wind die down. You check the rafters. Delilah hadn't just left. She had detonated her life in our foyer, and the fallout was still drifting through the air. I knew Caspian wouldn't be far, but I also knew men like him didn't have the stomach for a woman who was unraveling. He wanted the polished PTA president version of Delilah, not the one who screamed at her son in a fit of narcissistic rage. The days that followed were a master class in psychological endurance. Delilah didn't return that night or the next. Instead, the revenge of the silent husband took on a new form. I didn't call her. I didn't text her demanding an explanation. I didn't change the locks or throw her clothes on the lawn. I simply kept the house exactly as it was meant to be. I made Griffin's favorite dinners, pot roast, with carrots, grilled cheese, with the crusts cut off, and I sat with him in the living room while he did his homework. We were building a new world inside the shell of the old one, but the outside world wasn't finished with us. By Wednesday, the rumors started. I went into the local hardware store to pick up some weather stripping, and the air shifted the moment I walked in. Old man Miller behind the counter wouldn't look me in the eye. I heard whispers near the plumbing aisle, words like unstable, controlling, and poor Delilah. She was doing it again. From wherever she was hiding, likely Caspian's luxury condo in the city, she was feeding the town a narrative. She was telling everyone that I had chased her out with a hammer, that I was holding Griffin hostage, that I was a ticking time bomb. It's a strange thing watching your reputation be dismantled by a woman you once loved. It's like watching a house you built with your own hands being demolished by a wrecking ball you paid for. The heart-wrenching pain I'd felt before was gone, replaced by a cold surgical clarity. I realized that the only way to beat a liar is to let them talk until they run out of breath. When I got home, the drama escalated. A silver SUV was parked in the driveway, Delilah's mother, Evelyn. She was standing on the porch, her arms crossed, looking like a judge ready to pass a death sentence. Evelyn had always been Delilah's biggest enabler, the woman who taught her that being a victim was the most powerful role she could play. "Where is he, Rhodes?" she barked, before I even stepped out of the truck. "Where is my grandson? Delilah told me everything. She's terrified for his safety." I stepped out the gravel crunching under my boots. I didn't move toward her. I stood by the hood of my truck, let the rain mist onto my face, and just looked at her. "He's inside, Evelyn. He's doing his science project. If you want to see him, you're welcome to come in. But leave the accusations on the porch. We don't use that language in this house anymore." She looked taken aback by my calmness. She expected me to bar the door to give her a reason to call the police. When I stepped aside and gestured toward the door, she stumbled for a second, her rehearsed speech dying on her lips. Inside, Griffin was at the table surrounded by cardboard and glitter glue. He looked up when his grandmother entered, but he didn't run to her. He stayed in his seat. "Griffin, darling, come here," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a dramatic, tragic tone. "Are you okay? Did he do something to you?" Griffin looked at her. Then he looked at me. Then he did something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He picked up his science project, a model of a volcano, and walked over to her. "Grandma, why did Mom lie about Dad leaving?" Evelyn blinked, her face reddening. She didn't lie, honey. She was just worried. Your father is a very difficult man." "No, he isn't." Griffin interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm for a 10-year-old. "He's the one who's been here every night. He's the one who made me breakfast. Mom was the one in the black car. I saw her. I saw her kiss that man under the porch light while Dad was in the shop. Why did she say Dad didn't love me?" 2 days later, the big event happened. It was the night of the school's winter gala, an event Delilah had spent months planning. She was the head of the committee, the perfect mom who ran the show. I knew she'd be there. I knew she'd try to use the public setting to humiliate me one last time to regain her status. We walked through the main doors of the gymnasium, the bright lights, and the sound of the middle school band hitting us like a wall. The room went quiet as we entered. And there she was. Delilah was standing near the stage, wearing a stunning red dress. "Everyone knows Rhodes," she said, her voice rising so the surrounding parents could hear. "They know you're unstable. They know you've been keeping Griffin from me." I felt Griffin move beside me. He stepped forward. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "I'm not confused. I saw you. I saw you every time you lied. I don't want to go to the city with you. I don't want to be with someone who tries to make me hate my father just because she's bored." The gym was so quiet you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Delilah turned to Caspian, her eyes wide. "Do something." Caspian looked at her. Then he looked at the hundreds of parents staring with disgust. He put his drink down, turned on his heel, and walked out without looking back. Delilah was left standing in the center of the gym. Her perfect life collapsed in 30 seconds. We walked out of the gym through the cold night air. When we got home, the house felt different. The poison had been licked out of the wound. I went to the workshop and picked up the small box Griffin had been working on. It was nearly finished. I heard the heavy thud of a suitcase hitting the porch. Through the glass of the door, I saw her. Delilah was standing there, her makeup ruined by tears. She didn't try to open the door. She just stood there, looking through the glass at the home she had traded for a lie. I watched her hand reach out her fingers, trembling as she touched the wood of the doorframe. She stayed there for a long time, her forehead resting against the cold glass, the porch light casting a long, jagged shadow that reached all the way to my feet. The glass of the front door felt like a frozen barrier between two different worlds. I watched the silhouette of the woman I used to know, her breath fogging the pain in short, ragged bursts. Her fingers lingered on the frame, tracing the notches in the wood, as if trying to memorize a language she had forgotten how to speak. In the stillness of the mudroom, the only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock each second, marking the distance between the life we had and the wreckage she had left behind. I didn't reach for the handle. I didn't turn the deadbolt. I simply stood in the shadows, witnessing the silent collapse of a queen without a throne. Eventually, the shadow on the porch shifted. The trembling hand retreated, and I heard the slow, heavy drag of a suitcase across the floorboards, followed by the crunch of gravel as she walked toward the road. There was no car waiting for her this time, no Caspian, no flashy escape. Just the long, dark stretch of the driveway leading out into the fog. I waited until the sound of her footsteps vanished completely before I let out the breath I'd been holding since the gala. The following weeks were a strange, quiet harvest. In the aftermath of a storm, you expect a flood, but what we got was a profound, echoing clarity. The town, once fueled by Delilah's whispers, had turned its back on her with the same ferocious speed it had once used to judge me. People who had avoided my gaze at the hardware store now dropped off casseroles and offered awkward, mumbling apologies. I accepted them with a nod, but I didn't let them in. Silence had been my shield for so long that I wasn't quite ready to lay it down. Instead of retreating to a hobby, I focused on the land. We have 5 acres of rugged Montana hillside that had fallen into disrepair while I was busy working to fund Delilah's lifestyle. I spent my evenings out in the cold, clearing the dead wood and hauling heavy stones to rebuild the retaining wall that had crumbled near the creek. There was something honest about the weight of the stone. It didn't lie. It didn't manipulate. It just sat where you placed it, solid and dependable. Griffin joined me. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't give lectures. We just worked. He'd find the smaller stones to fill the gaps, his hands stained with red earth, his face flushed from the biting wind. We weren't crafting anything sentimental. We were simply fixing what was broken one heavy lift at a time. One afternoon, as the first real snow began to stick to the frozen ground, Griffin stopped. He was holding a jagged piece of slate, looking at the old rusted swing set that stood skeletal and abandoned near the edge of the woods. Delilah used to tell him I was going to tear it down because I hated his childhood. "Are we going to get rid of that, Dad?" he asked, pointing a muddy glove at the rusted metal. I wiped the sweat from my forehead despite the cold. "No. We're going to sand the rust off and prime the steel. It's got a good frame. It just needs the right care to keep it from snapping." He looked at the swing, then back at the wall we were building. "Like us?" I didn't answer right away. I just took the stone from his hand and wedged it firmly into a gap in the wall. "Exactly like us, Griff. The rust isn't the metal. It's just what happens when you leave things out in the rain for too long without checking on them." That was the moment I knew the poison had finally left his system. He wasn't looking for hidden meanings anymore. He was looking at the reality in front of him. As for Delilah, the closure came through a lawyer's courier. She wasn't fighting for the house or a payout. She was living in a rental in the city, working a retail job that offered her none of the status she craved. Caspian had vanished the moment the drama became unattractive, leaving her to face the town's cold shoulder alone. I signed the divorce papers on the hood of my truck, the ink slightly blurred by a stray snowflake. I didn't feel a surge of triumph, just the quiet relief of a heavy load finally being set down. The story of the silent husband isn't about winning a war. It's about refusing to fight on the enemy's terms. To those of you watching this, stuck in a cycle of lies and gaslighting, remember, integrity doesn't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay exactly where you are and let the storm break itself against you. This leads me to a question for all of you. There are two ways to look at how I handled this. Some might say I was too cold, that by staying silent, I let Griffin suffer through 6 months of confusion that could have been avoided if I'd just confronted Delilah immediately. Others believe that by letting the truth reveal itself, I gave Griffin the tools to see through manipulation for the rest of his life. What do you think? Did I protect my son? Or did I test him too harshly? And for those who have dealt with a victim player, like Delilah, is silence truly the best revenge, or does it just invite more pain? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm looking for real perspectives here. By December, the stone wall was finished. It wasn't perfect, but it was straight, and it was strong. I stood on the porch that night, watching the moonlight reflect off the snow. The house behind me was warm. There were no more whispers, no more hidden phones, no more shadows in the driveway. Griffin came out and stood beside me, handing me a mug of hot coffee. He didn't say thanks for the wall, and I didn't say sorry for the past. We just stood there in the cold, breathing in the clean air of a life that finally belonged to us. I reached out and turned off the porch light, letting the darkness be honest, letting the stars be enough. We didn't need the light to see who we were anymore.